Welcome to another episode of the Destination Linux podcast.
Welcome to episode 94 of Destination Linux. This is a podcast of opinions made up of three allegedly semi-intelligent guys discussing our passion for Linux. Now, I'm Zeb, and I'm especially pleased to welcome back Noah for another show. I now have a truly intelligent guy I can converse with.
Thank you. That's so nice of you.
Zeb, good to see you.
How are you today, Noah?
I'm good. How are you gentlemen doing?
Good.
Fantastic.
Also with me today are my two friends and co-hosts, the ever sesquipedalian Michael. How are you this week?
Did he just call you a name?
I don't know what that means, but I'm going to agree to it blindly and say yes. Yep, I'm doing great.
Good. And the always exuberant Ryan, how are you?
See, that word I understood. I'm doing great because the Mozilla IoT thing's still working, man.
Nice.
Is he going to pester us with that the whole show?
The whole time, every time I have a good idea. Bing.
Yep. I also like the fact that there's the brain connected to the lamp too.
Oh yeah.
The twister.
Yep.
Okay, so it would be rude not to start with our guest presenter, Noah. So what have you been up to this week that you'd like to tell us about?
That's been an exciting week. We're lining up a bunch of interviews to do like this marathon run of my program, the Ask Noah Show, in the next week or so. And so we've got a number of cool interviews that lined up. So I've been spending actually the majority of my time in the studio, either pre-recording them or talking to the guests about what they're going to say when they come live on the air. So today, for example, I had a chance to have a brief conversation with Fred Gleason from the Rivendell Audio Project, and he's going to come on the program probably either in the next couple of days or early next week, and he's going to talk to us about how you can do professional broadcasting on Linux. And if you don't have the skills or the time to set that up, he will pre-build you a Linux appliance specifically for broadcasting and ship it to you.
That is awesome.
Nice.
Michael, can you take advantage of that, please?
Well, I'll think about it.
Okay, good.
So that leads us nicely into Michael. And what have you been up to this week?
Well, I've just been setting up some more stuff for OBS and things like that, and lots of stuff to change around. In order to incorporate 4 cameras, I decided to really manipulate how I'm going to show like the visuals of the show and the visuals of the websites and the stuff like that. So I want to make sure that I got that ready before we started, and I'll do that in post.
Nice.
So none of it works.
No, it don't work.
In other words, let me translate for our audience.
Yeah, it don't work yet.
And then last but not least, Ryan, who's always up to something. So what have you been up to this week?
Well, listen, besides tying additional lights into the Mozilla IoT, we've got a Wi-Fi light hooked up now, along with the switch that runs another lamp, and kind of just testing with power outages we've been having in this area weekly, how the ability for this device to pick up once the power comes back on its own, and which devices kind of recuperate the fastest with that. Every device with the Mozilla IoT, the second the Raspberry Pi comes back on after power loss, reconnects except for one, and that is the dome motion sensor. So I do have some videos out there about it, but that would be one piece of product I suggest not to get with the Mozilla IoT, but everything else connects immediately. And I built the Arch XFCE i3 hybrid. So you guys know I did this Frankenstein with Fedora, where we took Fedora, put i3 on it, then we took the XFCE panel, stuck it in i3. So when you're lazy, you've got a nice panel with a whisker menu. When you're not feeling lazy, you still got all your key bindings. I did the same thing with Arch. I have it out there on my GitHub. So if you're feeling brave, want to play with some of it, you can go check out on my GitHub and play with the Arch XFCE i3, which it works well enough that I'm on it right now. So
so you're saying that you use Arch?
Yeah, just in case anybody was wondering, I do want to get that out there. I use Arch.
Nice. Okay, so we wanted to switch it up ever so slightly this week. So we're going to add this to the beginning of the show as well as mention it at the end, because some listeners might not necessarily make it all the way to the end. And what we wanted to say is that we do love our patrons. We just wanted to give them a special shout out for their support. And if you're not aware and you're listening to the show and you're not a patron, we do a live show for our patrons to come and join us. And if you want to be part of the show, you can join for as little as $1. And I can't say it as well as Ryan. So Ryan, what's that?
$1 darn near free. It's darn near free, so you might as well join up and you get to see behind the scenes and all the mistakes. If you think we make mistakes in post-production, you should see this thing live. Holy moly.
So if you want the worst possible version of the show, pay $1 and you'll get it.
Sounds good to me.
Perfect. Yep.
All right.
So Ryan, email time. What have you got for us?
So we got a brilliant email here from Chris, and it is so brilliant because I almost want to start with the PS part of his email, but
No, we don't do PSs.
We need to, because this one's particularly brilliant. So Chris says that he's coming back to Linux after 10 years away. He's away from the family for 10 years, but we will always accept you back. He's partially blind, and back when the Linux world transitioned from yield straight X11 environments like FVWM to desktop environments like GNOME and KDE, it became almost impossible for me to work in Linux because the UI elements were too small and there's no easy way to enlarge them. However, with recent versions of Ubuntu, they've added the missing puzzle piece, key-corded full-screen zoom that drove me to Mac 10 years ago. It has been a delight returning to Linux world. It's grown so much, which is true. Just in the 2 years I've been in it, it's grown incredibly. It's grown so much while I was away in all the best ways. I'm an engineer for Amazon Web Services by day and tinkerer at night, utterly blown away at all the amazing Linux apps that are available these days. So I was wondering if you might speak to accessibility when you review other Linux distributions in particular. Do they have things like full screen zoom, large text, and screen reader support that you can enable from the login screen? Thank you so much for all you do, especially Ryan. Ryan, you are great for the community. I used to co-host the podcast In It podcast, so I know how much work goes on behind the scenes that Ryan does to make something like this happen. So just a fantastic email all the way through.
Could you read the part about Ryan just one more time? My earphones cut out just a little bit.
Well, this is interesting because in the PS part, he says, Ryan, feel free to sprinkle Ryan is great liberally through the email whenever you read it. So I love Chris. I love him. He also says, given that Team Red has so many advantages, how come Team Green seems to rule the roost for high-end gaming laptops? This is actually a real issue that I'm getting a lot of questions on, that the Ryzen laptops are just starting to come out now. The manufacturers are starting to release them. But he's correct. There's very, very little options in comparison with the NVIDIA ones. So I think the reason is it takes a long time to change a manufacturing process. I think a lot of the manufacturers were probably holding off to see if Ryzen was going to hold on to its popularity and also its advantages that it's had lately with its CPUs. So you're going to start seeing a lot more. We're starting to hear a lot more of these laptops coming out. So you just wait. Team Red is taking over. Don't worry about that.
Or maybe they were just waiting for the new 20 series card so they can put them in their laptops because they know they're going to sell them.
It's probably just the fact that AMD's only been viable for 4 years. So that's probably why.
Yeah, I mean, really, they haven't had the only time you got an AMD before was for budget stuff because they were too hot for laptops. Most of them ran way too hot and they were in budget laptops. Now with the Ryzen chipset, everything's changed. I think it's taken a long time for the manufacturers to adjust, and they're starting to make those deals with AMD, and we're starting to see laptops come out. So you're going to see that playing field shift, I predict here.
They've been enlightened.
Exactly. They've been enlightened. But brilliant email, Chris. And by the way, brilliant suggestion on accessibility, because it's something I've never really taken even the reviews that I do to look at or to talk about. And it's very important clearly here because at one point you had to leave Linux because it wasn't there. So that's something we'll definitely incorporate in our discussion.
We'll add that to our checklist, absolutely. Yep. So as usual, it always brings up the question, how do you use Linux? So send us an email on how you use Linux and the applications that you've found to accomplish the work you do to comments@destinationlinux.org. And who knows, you may even make it into the show.
There you go.
So, Michael, on to some news.
Yep, absolutely. And first up, we got Feren OS has a new snapshot available, and this is fittingly titled October Snapshot. And this is a lot of changes in this particular release. Feren OS is a friend of the show, and we've talked about it before. It used to be a cinnamon-based Mint derivative distribution, and they did a lot of interesting modifications to that setup. But they're now kind of transitioning away from that into an Ubuntu base that uses Plasma, but not using Kubuntu as the base. So the way they're addressing it is really interesting. And they also made it where it's possible to do a update base system where you can go from the Mint version to the Ubuntu version. I'm not really sure how that works, but it's a really interesting idea. Zeb, you said you looked at this recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I mean, I've always tried to follow Feren. When I found out, probably about 2 years ago now, that at that time he was actually a 14-year-old student.
Oh wow!
Making his own OS, and I'm sitting here at 56 thinking, wow, that is just stunning. And he's come on leaps and bounds, and he got his Cinnamon desktop into a really good state. You could have any number of sort of like themes and variations of how you wanted it to run. But then I think he got a bit panicky when people started talking about they were going to be taking away theming capabilities, and something else spooked him. So he realized that he maybe needed to move platforms. So he's gone head over heels with the KDE version. And it's coming along very, very nicely. It's got those Feren touches that you know and love about him. And his attention to detail. He will spend days trying to get that final pixel into place before he issues that theme. So yeah, he's doing really well.
Interesting. Yeah, he's done an interesting thing here with the Ubuntu base now, that he's basically created a settings option, manage base update channel. And now you can move it away from basically Mint LTS or Ubuntu LTS and move it into like Ubuntu 18.10 base. So he's doing some really interesting things here. And one of the things I know about Feren is he's always in the community. So if we do a live show, if anybody in the community that we know does a live show, he's always there in the audience. He's always supportive. So maybe go check out what he's doing over there with his distro, because really, really cool individual and very supportive of everyone else's work. And looks like he's doing some amazing things here. And it sure beats my childhood at 14 of playing with He-Man. He built the whole distro. So there you go.
Yeah, sounds cool. So keeping on the KDE theme, we've got news that's come out from Solus that they've now got a publicly available Plasma testing ISO. And the ISO includes Plasma Desktop 5.14, the KDE Frameworks 5.51, the KDE Applications 18.08.2, and Qt 5.11.2. Now, they've always been trying to play with KDE, and there's a particular guy who works on Solus. It's been his little baby. But what I found really interesting about this is it was great to hear some news coming out of Solus other than where's Ike? That was like getting a little bit, oh really? Oh, someone's got a downy on Ike again. Hey, the rest of the team are working their socks off for you guys, and they've now got, and I've actually installed it and had it up and running, and everything just installed and worked perfectly on it. So for a public testing ISO, it's in pretty good shape. Has anybody else tried it?
Yeah, I tried it, and what's actually kind of funny is that I talked to someone who's contributing to it, and they used to work on Kubuntu when I started like contributing, and then they decided to switch to Solus.
As soon as Michael started contributing.
No, listen, it sounds bad, but it gets good. Okay, the point is that when they switched, they took the ideas that I gave to Kubuntu and also implemented them in Solus. So the Solus version has the same hybrid approach where the panels and the windows are like they're designed so that they're useful. They work with the default themes of every application, and at the same time the panel isn't just constantly super bright in your face. So there's a lot of stuff that they're doing, and I'm really happy to see that more people are adopting that kind of approach of polishing the Plasma instead of just shipping by default, because the default, no.
Mm. And just a quick question for you, Michael, because I know you're the Plasma expert here. Those different things that I talked about, the Plasma, the frameworks, the applications, are they the latest and greatest, or are they just a couple of levels down to be really stable?
Those are the latest, actually. Those are
wow! So they're pretty cutting edge.
Yeah, the Plasma 5.14 has released like 2 weeks ago, I think. Might have been a week ago. I don't remember exactly, but the frameworks is brand new. The applications The applications are, I think, from August, but that's the latest batch anyway. So, and the latest version of Qt, I think that was like 2 weeks ago. So, like, this is pretty up to date.
Well, he's actually they're working on another thing here too with Solus. They're hosting a Hackfest, which that for our patrons, it's tomorrow. We record on Fridays, but basically that Hackfest, they're working on jack support specifically within Solus. Now, this really caught my attention because I've had a lot of issues with Pulse Audio and audio equipment. Although I was curious, Noah, have you ever tried jack, or do you get along, all the professional audio stuff you do you get along with Pulse just fine on all your equipment?
I've done both. I've used Pulse to do some audio over IP stuff, and I have played with jack a little bit, although I tried to get native jack to work and it was complicated to me. So what I ended up doing was using a YouTube tutorial on how to use Reaper, and it actually gives you what they call the matrix, and you just get there's a row of outputs and a column of inputs, and you just put a check mark where you want an input to hit an output. And
that's
my brain is not real good sometimes, so the little dot thing makes sense to me.
No, jack is really painful to set up. In fact, I had to do a script of it. Scrapjaw, who's a member of the community, helped me set it up initially because I couldn't get the audio equipment I had to work with Pulse at all. And jack worked perfectly with it because in jack you can set up all of the different settings that you need to kind of interface with this equipment. But every time I distro hopped, it was like, oh gosh, I got to do this again. How do you do all that stuff? So yeah, the Reaper thing, I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds good.
Speaking of latest and greatest, MorpheusArch Linux has a new release. Now, this is a really particularly cool. It's a purpose-built version of Arch. Its purpose is for data recovery and data recovery tools. Now, as soon as this wound up in the dock, I actually started playing with this because I have a small little tool bag that I take with me everywhere. It sits inside of my backpack, and whether I'm out at a client site, I'm in the shop, or if I'm just out and about, that little tool bag is with me. And there are certain things that I have with me all the time: ability to reset Windows passwords, a live bootable hard drive, and a lot of the tools that I carried on flash drives are included in MorpheusArch. So some of the tools that are included are PhotoRec, DD Rescue, and Test Disk, which allow you to do all sorts of different testing and file recovery. And so I actually written this ISO to a flash drive, played with it for a little bit, and liked it so much that it is now in my, what I call my essentials bag, comes with me everywhere.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Nice. And you've only just sort of like discovered it's there, so you're not quite sure how quickly they keep it up to date, but I'm guessing Arch, it will be pretty relevant.
Right. And the thing is, there is a time for rock solid stability, right? There is a time to have a system where you don't want changes to it. The machine that sits in here that we do the show on every week, obviously I don't want that machine changing from week to week. But when it comes to data recovery, specifically when it comes to searching for, there's always a different kind of file system or a different way that you might have to attack a problem. And so the ability to have that kind of distribution, that kind of appliance, if I want to call it that, to constantly have updates means that when you're out in the field and actually doing work, the technology is outpacing you and outpacing your problems, and so you don't have to fight that battle.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, and what was interesting is when I saw this article in there, it reminded me that I'd just seen another recovery ISO that I wasn't aware out there, and that was on the Antigos community spins. Someone's created an Antigos recovery ISO, again with a raft of tools. I haven't had a good look at it yet, so what I might do is compare the two and then see which one would be the best to take. But hey, it's like a little 8 gigabyte ISO, just 8 gigabyte USB with your ISOs on. So just take them both out, and then you can work with whichever tool works best for you.
I love having a ton of USBs for recovery, for live Linux sessions. If I'm out and about and things like that, my bag looks ridiculous usually because it's got 20 or 30 USBs in it. But I did run this recently, and guess what I recovered? I recovered Linus Torvalds because he's back. How do you like that transition?
Nice.
That was amazing.
Right? That was good.
So Linus has officially come back. It was in the 4.19 kernel notes where Greg Hartman basically said to Linus, I'm handing the kernel tree back to you. You have the joy of dealing with the merge window, and put a smiley face there for him. So this is big news, right? Linus is back, and we've covered stories on it. He says he's not going to be a cuddly teddy bear. but he may be a little less colorful in his replies. And some of the thoughts on there that he wasn't going to come back should be put to rest now because he's here.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there's the best thing about it is that you don't have to worry about whether it's up in the air or not, because it's no longer up in the air.
Yep.
I admittedly was one of the people that was concerned of the future of the Linux kernel without Linus, because I thought it would be a politically difficult move to bring him back, given the fact that I'm not convinced he can control himself. And I still don't know that I necessarily believe that he's going to control his language to the extent that we want to believe he's going to control his language. But I think that the fact that he's making an effort will be recognized, if not by, the extremists, certainly by the Linux majority, or the majority of the community. I think will recognize that he's making an effort, and they'll see that.
Well, I love how he solved the problem. It's such a programmer mindset of how he solved it, because what I read is he wrote a filter to filter his emails. So
correct.
He's going to say what he wants still. Right. It's just the server will take care.
Can you just imagine though when that goes wrong, like how exactly how would that come through exactly? What are you talking about? There's pockets all over the email. It's like that doesn't really make
He'd probably
sense.
replace it with some unicorn or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Just random words.
What the unicorn is wrong with your brownies?
Exactly.
Well, the email will be, "Hello, Greg. Regards, Torvalds."
Everything else will be cut out. I love it.
All right. So next up is something else that's been interesting this week, and that is a new version of Ubuntu 18.10 has been available for the Raspberry Pi. Now, this is being not made by Canonical or the Ubuntu team, but made by Arne Exton, who's also known for making RaspX and a lot of other things. And this is a new version of RaspX that is based on the Ubuntu 18.10. And sometimes you'll see the first distro that uses something, usually like a beta version. It's typically some from Arne Exton. And this is an interesting thing. So people who want to use Raspberry Pi and you don't want to use Raspbian, they want to use an Ubuntu base, this is an opportunity to use that. I don't know how well GNOME would work on a Raspberry Pi. I don't know. But there is another. You could use Ubuntu Mate Raspberry Pi version as well. It is kind of interesting to see that these he's working on these, because I kind of question how much work he can do and how much support he can do for this particular distro, because he makes like 15 to 20 different distros. I don't see how he could keep up with all of those and actually keep security updates and all this other stuff, because it seems like there's a new he'll have a new push every month or so. So I'm not really sure how he could do that.
Well, I must admit, Michael, that was a concern of mine. I first saw run Ubuntu 18.10 on a Raspberry Pi, and I thought, yeah, great, we're going to get some of this. And then I read the second line, and I thought, hang on a minute, that's the guy who does Xtix.
Yeah.
That looks great, but just doesn't ever quite cut it. So there's a little caveat there, people. If you're going to try it, and the beautiful thing about the Raspberry Pi is you can try it, and if it goes wrong, just whack another image on there. But yeah, I've always found his distros to be different and very, very, but they're really good looking. But he does something weird with his PPAs that I can never quite work out. So you can't add anything to it. So you run with what he's got because he's locked down the PPAs, and I'm not technical enough.
So you guys are saying he needs a case of maybe focusing on one or two projects and kind of getting that in there. And that can be fair feedback. I like what he's doing here. Now, my son runs Raspbian OS because you don't have to do it on a Pi on his laptop. He's 5. That's his laptop. Got to raise him right. And obviously, I love using Raspbian on the Raspberry Pi. I think it's a fantastically light and great operating system for Raspberry Pi. Speaking of which, the Raspberry Pi is just amazing. If you don't have one, go pick up 3, because you're going to need 3 with all the projects you can do with them. They are just
so I don't know if you're joking or being sarcastic, but I legitimately have a little bin down in my basement, and it's labeled unused Pis. And I have a couple of them on hand, and if I use one up for a project, then I order another one, and then it goes back into the bin. But I always have a little stash of them because, just the other day we were working for an office, and they asked me for something simple. They said, what we want, they have this big warehouse, and they want people to go to lunch. But the problem is everybody kind of pads their lunchtime. So the half an hour lunch break turned into 40 minutes, turns into 45, turns into like an hour and 10 minutes. So somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour, that's what they're taking for lunch. And they said, can we have a system that just plays a tone at a given time? And then that tells everybody to go to lunch, and then it plays a tone again. That way we know if you're sitting in the break room after the tone, then your lunchtime is up. And we did that with a Pi and at a cron job, and it's very straightforward and hacked together. But we basically generated a sine wave, created a little wave file, put it in there, and cron plays out that file at the two appropriate times. And we did that with a Pi. But it was one of those things that it was just off the cuff. And I said, yeah, sure, let me run down to my little bin, grab a Pi, set it up in 15 minutes or whatever, gave it to him, and then ordered a replacement for it.
Yep.
Nice.
It's ridiculously flexible. And one of our patrons said only 3, I'm up to 8. And so I'm bidding right now on lots of Raspberry Pis, like on eBay, they call it, if you have more than one of the same thing, a lot. So I'm bidding on as big a lots as I can because there are so many projects I want to do, and I'm tied down to just 2. I want a bunch of these things because, like you said, you can set them up for these. First of all, they cost nothing in comparison, and they're so robust and powerful with the projects. And even in this, what he's done with Ubuntu 18.10, it's amazing to me that little ARM architecture can run any variation of Ubuntu 18.10, which just shows you, number one, how well programmed Ubuntu is, and number two, how powerful those little Raspberry Pis have become. So cool project.
Yeah, I mean, I have only like 2 myself, but the issue with mine is that they're the Model B version, like the really old version that don't even have like the 4 USBs. So
so the Model 2 then.
Yeah.
No, there's the B and then there's a B plus. I have the regular B that doesn't
but
have
the third generation though, I don't think there is a model of third generation that doesn't come with all 4 ports.
Right. Yeah, it's this generation. Yeah, it's the second generation. It's one of the old ones that doesn't have a gig of RAM or anything. It's like the 512 RAM.
Sure.
But it's still, like, surprisingly, you can still use that version to run like a Kodi interface and like play videos just fine. And then if you get the latest versions, which cost the same thing, they're twice as powerful, and you can do a ton more with this very cheap piece of hardware. And like there's always something you can use them for. And I have them doing ridiculous things like managing different sync servers and stuff because, while it's not going to be holding any files, it can manage be the brain for it as well. So there's a ton.
Has
of
anybody tried the competitors to Raspberry Pi? Because every time I mention Raspberry Pi, people are saying, "Oh, there's these other ones out there."
Odroid or Arduino, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Are they any good?
No. I mean, no, they are. They're different tools for different jobs, right? So there's the Raspberry Pi is legitimately a computer. Like that's what it is. It's a desktop computer that they've condensed down into a tiny little board. And that's how you use it. A lot of the quote unquote competitors to the Raspberry Pi, they're really more like a programmable device. They do like things. And the best example I can think of was, and I think we used an Arduino for this, but I wanted to make a pedal that I could step on for mumble and activate a push to talk. And so essentially what I needed something to do was emulate pushing, I think, my right control key, but I needed it into a pedal. So of course my hacker mind space just goes, well, go buy a Logitech keyboard and tear it apart and solder 2 wires to the control key and that, and then run it down to a foot pedal. And his good friend of mine looked at it, he's like, what is that? And I'm like, that is the way I control mumble. And he's like, no, we're going to do this with an Arduino. And so he helped me program this Arduino that ran to a foot controller, and I could then control mumble with it. And that's just, I mean, you could do that with a Pi through the GPIO, but that's not really what the Pi is designed for, nor would an Arduino be designed to run Ubuntu 18.10 with no.
Gotcha.
So I would say that they're different devices for different purposes. I will tell you, if you're looking for an enterprise grade ARM system for doing, probably even for the Bell system that I set up, probably should have gone that way. There are companies that make ARM computers that are basically clones of the Raspberry Pi, except they're designed with standards so that, for example, the Raspberry Pi notoriously terrible for working with a bunch of different power supplies. And so those enterprise variants don't have that.
Nice. Very cool stuff. Thank you for that insight.
Yeah, just hold on, just a quick update. I was incorrect on the it uses LXDE, not GNOME. So that's slightly
that
not
changes
as,
everything, Michael. Well done.
Yeah, it's it doesn't
Now it's
change
not even
everything.
1810.
Yeah,
Now it's like 1809.
exactly.
Zeb, you're muted, sir.
That'll be why he was all ignoring me. So yeah, if it's on the older LXDE, how can he be starting with 1810? Because that's LXQT, isn't it?
Yeah, but they're using it. Apparently, I guess they're just using the older packages because LXDE is still in the repos. He's just taking Ubuntu 1810 as the base and then putting LXD in. So it's kind of like making like a compensation approach. But I'm not really sure how well that would work out because I don't know if anyone's still maintaining LXDE in Ubuntu or what they're doing. But I know LXDE is like it's in the pretty much the final stages.
Well, I'm going to give it a go because my Pi's sitting here not doing a lot since I beat Ryan with the retro games thing that we were going through.
Whoa.
We're gonna
Nobody
move this
beat
on
me.
now,
Got 'em.
and we're gonna move this. I beat you with the help of the community.
I thought we were moving on, Zeb.
Well, we are moving on, and I can see that you guys have tried to persuade me here about the next piece of software news because I think you all know I'm a Google fanboy.
Boo.
And
agree.
Get out.
Firefox 63 has been released.
The best browser ever.
Yes.
Yep, so Firefox 63 is out this week, and it comes with major improvements to web extensions, whatever they are. Additional
All the
changes
extensions.
include content blocking, a collection of Firefox settings that offer users greater control over technology that can track them around the web. Well, isn't that just an ad blocker?
Well, you wouldn't know anything about that, Zeb. Since you use Google, you want people to track you across the web and turn on your webcam
I
and
use
watch what you're
Google
doing
Origin.
and all of that stuff. So
You
it's
just accept your fate
Yeah.
and just move on.
Yeah, you wouldn't understand that stuff. We'll explain it from here.
So explain it. Take it away, boys. Yeah.
Basically, what Firefox 63 has done is they're hammering down on the privacy stuff more in version 63, which I absolutely love seeing. So users can opt out to block third-party tracking cookies or block all trackers and create exceptions through sites. So they're giving you more and more control over this thing called privacy and ways that basically companies are utilizing web technology and things to track and fingerprint and find out where you're going, where you've been, what you've done on the web. And they're doing more now to keep you safe and have patched 14 vulnerabilities in this version of 63. And I love that that's their focus. I think that's one of the most important things about differentiating Firefox from Google. For a while, there were performance differences. And I'll be completely honest with you. When I first started in Linux, I used Google Chrome because the performance was just so much better. That is not the case since Quantum. Since Quantum, everything changed. The only thing that runs better on Google now is Google's own crappy products.
And apparently, it seems like they're doing that on purpose
Yes.
because they can't hide behind the false, the fake news of Firefox being slower anymore.
Yep.
But I used to use Firefox even though it was slower, and I just accepted it.
Yeah.
Well, what I found interesting about this is over the previous shows, it always seemed to be sort of like negative stuff that was coming out where Firefox were going to be throwing some adverts at you that you didn't want to do, and they were going to be doing all sorts of...
No, people just blew up
stuff
the
with
stuff that wasn't
projects.
really a big deal. They just blew it up.
But have you noticed with this, it's all the good stuff. It's all, we're going to be protecting your privacy. We've patched all of these vulnerabilities. We're going to stop people blocking the content, and yet we're going to make it easy for you to add your little whitelist if you've got a particular website that you want to allow.
That's a brilliant point, Seb, actually, is that there was a couple of moments. I remember in the show telling Mozilla they're on notice. There was a couple of moments there where they were making some stupid decisions. This is going back to the basics. This is going back to the roots of why Firefox became popular. This is a situation where you're seeing a release where they're focusing on the right things. Right? They're not trying to put little games and things in there. Now, even with the little stuff we were talking about with, Mr. Robot things and little stupid things they were doing, it's still 1/1000th of the stupid junk that runs in Chrome. So it's like, it
and
was
also most of the
annoying
things they
because
were
we know what
complaining about.
Firefox was supposed to focus on.
Yeah.
The other thing is if you ever disagree with the decision that Mozilla makes, you only have yourself to blame because all of their meetings are open. You can attend every Mozilla meeting. They webcast it. And so you can watch, I think it's the beginning of the week, Monday or Tuesday or something like that. But they broadcast all of their meetings. They're open. So, all of their decisions and the reasons for their decisions and the discussion behind their decisions, all available to everybody.
There you go.
And also, when I first saw that when they did the conversation about getting rid of tab groups, I was very adamant against it. And then when they started explaining it, one of the developers from Mozilla was talking about how they have a better solution that they're working on, and they're going to release it in like 2 weeks. So I said, okay, I'll just wait and to see what happens. And then container tabs come out, and they're 1,000 times better, and I'm okay with it. So like, if you're going to replace something and it's way better, totally do that. But this is also the fact that they're doing the separate processes for web extensions is great, because it means all extensions are now separate processes, so they can't interconnect to each other. They can't see what your tabs are doing, what you're doing on the browser, unless you allow them to. And they all now have the individual controls for permissions, where that you can for an example is an extension could say, I need to use your bookmarks, but it's not a requirement. It's just an optional feature if you would like. And so, like, allow you the add-on to search your bookmarks. You can go in and optionally choose that, and then give it permissions individually for that thing. That's a very cool thing that they're adding. So I think that as far as like the privacy thing, Firefox is doing it very well.
You know, to add to that, one of the other features that I think is underrated as it comes to privacy is, so when you go to Facebook, for example, and Facebook wants to start scraping what every website you visit and what you're doing on those websites and how long you're there, those isolation processes make it so Facebook can't do that.
Yeah.
And so,
and Firefox goes even farther than that and does the Facebook container. So that if you install the add-on, it will automatically force, anytime you go to anything that's controlled by Facebook, even Instagram will force it. So that the only thing Facebook can track you is tabs that you are using that they own the rights to, see your data, kind of thing. Like they own the access. So, and if you are in a Facebook container, you click a link and it takes you somewhere else, it will automatically take you out of that container and force you into a regular container or a no container situation. So it makes sure that Facebook can, the least amount of possible tracking they can do is what they're trying for.
Or even better, stop using Facebook. Just use Firefox.
That's an option.
This is perfect for you, Ryan, because you can now get yourself back on Facebook.
I will never be on that pile of blue junk that people call Facebook.
Don't keep yourself isolated.
In theory, I'm all for you. In the real world, there's an audience out there, right? We must go minister to where the sinners are.
Where the sinners
and they're on Facebook, sadly enough. Before we get to the next story, there's a small short story I have to tell that kind of goes with it. So some of you may have remembered the old JB editor, Rikai, who used to edit all the videos. And he would, from time to time, send me links that we were to include in our app picks. And of course, ultimately, the decision was either mine or Chris. And so oftentimes he would send them to me. And so he sent me this link to this program. And I looked at it and went, I don't know what that is. Closed out of it. Like a week later, he goes, hey, you never covered this app. Here it is again. So this goes on for like 6 weeks. Finally, I'm in the middle of trying to write an ISO with DD, and it's just not working. And I start Googling around, and lo and behold, this app called Etcher, which he had sent me 6 times previous, turns out to be a great freaking app. And I just didn't know about it because I didn't actually read the link that he sent me. And Etcher has, since then, I've used Etcher for every time I want to write an ISO over to a USB drive, and they've just released 1.4.5. So if you're not familiar with Etcher, it's a very straightforward app that it'll run on any sort of, well, it runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux, but on Linux, you just double click on it and it will run. It's what's the packaging for? It's not Flatpak. App image. Yeah. So it just, you literally double click on it and it just runs right there. There's no package that you have to install, no repo that you have to add. This particular release has a center content independent window resolution. It adds Electron native file picker. It also hides the unsafe mode option when you toggle that environment variable. You can use a design background or color to step the size ordering. A bunch of really, really cool features. The new GTK dark theme mode. I like dark apps. I just think they look better, more professional. But really, it doesn't really matter what features they add or don't add, because it was really a perfect app to begin with. And
they're just improving it.
Yeah, right. How many features can you really pack into a thing that takes an ISO and writes it to a drive? It did that before. It does that now. Use it.
Some of the things they're doing is kind of interesting. They added Font Awesome. Have you ever heard of Font Awesome?
I have. I just, again, in a drive.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I linked it to you. You never look at it. I get it.
Yeah. No, I just. I've screwed myself.
Next week, you're gonna be like, there's this awesome thing, Font Awesome.
Well, okay, Font Awesome is an icon set basically. So like
Yes.
it's an icon set for the web. So you instead of having like a ton of of images or like this thing's called sprites, which it used to be like a giant image that had small images, and you just kind of like use CSS to pick and choose which one you wanted. It does it in fonts so that it's like automatic SVG, so they can be any size, any color, any orientation. They can rotate, they can do animations, all kinds of stuff, and they're like super lightweight. But what's really cool is that Font Awesome also allows you to use them on your computer so that you can take any icon that's in the thing and use it for your applications, or you could actually like open them in Inkscape and modify
it's really
the SVGs.
useful in i3, to your
Yeah.
point. So in i3, if you have Pi bar and things, you could have icons within your Pi bar, which will show using Font Awesome, which will show whatever you want to show there. For instance, a CPU, you could have a little icon for it and things like that. So
Yeah.
you can incorporate it.
It's really cool.
Really nice. And one thing that they've added, I think a lot of people don't really sort of put much attention to it, because we've all got our drives that we know work. They've got the Etcher blacklisted drives. So if you put your USB device into it and they know they've had a lot of problems with it, it just doesn't work. I can't remember if they actually pop up a little thing that goes, you can't use this particular USB, but it won't put you through the heartache of sitting there for 4 minutes. It burns it anyway, and then you shove it in your machine and it doesn't work. So that side of it, I think, was really cool.
Yeah,
Make
that's
it
very
more
cool.
reliable.
Yeah, I didn't know about that.
Buy SanDisk drives and you'll never have that problem.
Yeah, there you go. You're not being coy, right?
No, I'm
SanDisk
dead
is
serious.
the best.
I mean, literally, we order SanDisk drives in bulk because they just always work for everything. I don't know if we've ever had one fail, and that's including dropping them off of roofs, running them through, the washer
Wow.
multiple times. Yeah, they're just really great drives.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you're using a SanDisk drive, you may be using one to store a movie that you edited and maybe won an Emmy with, like this tool called Lightworks,
Totally.
which is for Linux, but they have a new version out, 14.5, which is also
Yes,
for
they
Linux.
do.
And this Lightworks is so good, in fact, that it's been used to edit films like Pulp Fiction, Batman, and The King's Speech. So those are all huge, massive movies. And I think there are some others as well. I don't use Lightworks, but Noah, a little birdie, told me you do.
I do. I use Lightworks for everything. In fact, I have their highest tier, if you call it membership, I guess. And I have bought all specific Lightworks hardware to control all of my Lightworks editing rigs, because I think it's some of the most fantastic video editing software out there. Lightworks, if you haven't used it before, then they've recently made a change. They've gone from their the traditional, what they call the floating layout, which was their windows all over the place and you could arrange them in any way you want, to what they're now calling the static layout. And the static layout is you can't really arrange the way that the workflow is set up, and they just kind of want you to work with it that way. And it goes through a staging process. So the first stage is importing the clips, the second stage is editing the clips, and then the third stage is publishing the clips. And they've really gone to a clip-based workflow. This latest release adds a number of really cool things. The most important thing that at least that I've noticed is the improved support for AC3 AC3 AC audio. And the problem that we had was most consumer grade video cameras record in AVC formats, a compressed version of like H.264, and the problem with that is that AC3 audio oftentimes would develop these little hiccups almost, where it would just blip when you would try to edit it. And in the latest version, they have solved that. That's been the biggest thing that I've noticed, because I'm no longer having to transcode the audio and then resync it up. But Lightworks is a phenomenal video editor. If you're ever looking for a professional grade tool on Linux, Lightworks is the way to go for video editing. And recently, they also added the feature to export the audio over into Reaper, which is a professional digital audio workstation. And so you're able to take your audio out of Lightworks, put it into Reaper, edit it, and then bring it back into Lightworks all seamlessly, because the two projects are working together. Important to note, neither of those two are open source. So there's the disclaimer.
Yeah, Reaper's really good too, and they also added Blackmagic RAW support, which is really cool. I would like to point out the interface thing is a very highly debated topic in the sense of how Lightworks works, and the sense that I prefer the static approach Not necessarily that I prefer the way they lay it out. I prefer that they have a layout.
Right.
Because when you have the floating system, it's basically a desktop inside of your desktop. And you have to know what you want to use and where to position it and all this other stuff before you can even do anything. So what I want is them to give me the static version as a default for the floating version, so I can change stuff, but at least have like a starting
point.
Yeah.
If I may, the reason that they did that was twofold. One is they wanted to let you use Lightworks to do any one of the number of things. So, for example, when you get into Hollywood grade films, most times you don't, like when you're doing a consumer grade video, oftentimes you'll import the video, you'll do all the editing, then you do the color correction, then you add the effects, and then you export, and you do all of that inside of your NLE. In professional Hollywood grade movies, they don't do that. There's a color correction guy, and he's got color correction software, and he does all of that there. And then you've got your sound effects guy, and he does all that, and a special effects guy, and he does all that. And then really the NLE is just compiling these clips together. And so the advantage of that operating system, like as you so eloquently put it, operating system like layout, is that you can do any one of the things at any one of the times. And the other thing is it becomes operating system transparent, right? Because Lightworks in macOS looks like Lightworks in Windows, looks like Lightworks in Linux, because it literally absorbs all of your screen real estate and you work within Lightworks.
Right. I mean, I like the idea of having it. I just would like to be able to have an NLE that looks like an NLE to start. Yeah. That's all.
Yeah. Lightworks is confusing no matter which layout you use.
Yeah. That's true.
So
But
it costs
pretty
about
powerful.
$25 per month or $175 per year, or you can get an outright license for $438.
Kind of. Yeah, that's so with the 1080p export. If you're okay with 720p export, or if you sign up for a Vimeo account, you can get 1080p export for free with the free version, and that costs nothing.
No, and Vimeo's is not that expensive either. I think it's less than
free.
25.
No, you can sign up for Vimeo for free, and then you can export your videos as long as it's linked to your Vimeo account. 1080p doesn't cost anything.
That's very cool.
Wow. That was good to know.
There.
Also, another cool thing that's coming out soon, or maybe not soon, but they announced it recently, and there's I am very interested in this, especially because of the desktop environment that they've decided. Well, not desktop, but anyway, Pine64 has mentioned that they are considering, and they've pretty much announced that they're going to be doing this. They've kind of said that people can sign up for a developer kit, but they haven't really. I haven't seen a way to like a path to actually sign up, but I'll look more into that, but it's really cool because Pine64, the same people who make the Pine64 board as well as the Pinebook, and I happen to have in my possession, I don't own it, but in my possession is a Pinebook, and it is a very high quality product for such a little bit of money. There are some caveats to it, but overall it's surprisingly good. The phone that they're talking about making is a budget Linux smartphone. And the phone would be using the KDE Plasma environment, using Plasma Mobile. So that by itself,
excited, right?
that by itself is a reason for me to be interested. So
it's amazing that they're always going after this $100 price tag, because it's really become their kind of niche, right? That they go after that, and I think it's a very alluring price tag, because there were a lot of moments where I was just going to get a Pinebook because it's $100. I don't need it. It's a $100 computer. Like, why not? And the same thing I feel about this budget Linux smartphone. It's supposed to have maybe 2 gigs of RAM and 16 gigs of storage. And what a great little phone to bring around. I remember you telling a story one time, Noah, on your show about having extra Ting SIM cards to hand out to people when they needed them. And this kind of reminded me, like, at this price, if your friend broke their phone and didn't have one, or you broke your own, having this in a drawer you could pull out, slap a Ting SIM card in, and just start going. I mean, for $100, why not, right?
My bag is out in the car. I actually, if I had brought my laptop bag in here, I would have them. I have 5 of them with me.
nice.
So, yeah, I think it's a pretty cool idea. But, Zeb, you don't look convinced. You don't look like you're going to be ordering one.
Well, you guys know that I need my beauty sleep. So when one actually hits the shops, just wake me up. Everybody talks about, we're going to do this phone, we're going to do that phone. Microsoft failed. Ubuntu failed. this lineage thing that's meant to be coming out, or whatever it is that's meant to be coming out, where is it? People have been paying $500 for this phone for the last 12 months. Where is it?
Well, no, Purism is a totally different thing, because that was Purism was a Kickstarter, and they're designed to be coming out next year. Like they announced next year is when they're coming.
They're different. It's a different thing. I agree, but to his point, everybody wants to enter the mobile world, and nobody really has done it successfully except Google and Apple.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but they also, I mean, the reason they did it is because, essentially Google joined the next year after Apple did, and they had the opportunity really easily to do it, because when they were competing with Apple, Apple only had a year. Now you're dealing with like a decade of having competition, and I think that this is a reasonable approach, because they're doing it in like a very cheap cost, so that they can get more people to be doing it, and maybe it could be helpful to other countries and like non-developed countries that can't afford the full price.
Missing here is the reason why Apple and Google win is because they have the most apps. They have the apps, they have the developers to put out the apps. Now, something's changing in the phone world that nobody's accounted for. And that's why I think there can be a player for the first time. And that is, suddenly your phone is now as powerful as desktop computers were several years ago, meaning you're now getting quad-core processors in there. Not the same kind of quad-core, but quad-core processors. You're getting 8 to 16 gigabytes of RAM in some of these phones now. You're getting to a price point where they're as expensive as computers. Now when you talk about apps, you're talking about a phone with the ability, especially on Linux, to run a full version of, say, Kden Live, of being able to run a full version of Firefox, because they literally have the power now. So imagine you taking that phone and you could take every open source app out there and load it onto that phone in day one with that power. Now, you're going to get that on this Pine64 phone? No, because it's $100. But it could be done for the first time. I think there could be room for a third player to come in and win, and it's because of the power of the hardware that they're able to stick in your hand now.
Yep.
So,
and also the fact that web apps are taking over.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I want them to succeed. I just can't see it happening anytime soon.
Well, I mean, the examples you gave about Microsoft and Ubuntu couldn't do it. Microsoft couldn't do it because they...
And Firefox.
Well, Firefox was trying to do it in a very different way.
Okay, how about the what was the third one? They had a really good shot too.
BlackBerry
Selfish
was out there.
Selfish didn't make it.
Selfish still exists though. Like, it still works. Yola still sells it in Europe and stuff like that. But the reason why Microsoft failed is because they assumed that they could use the Windows brand and then force people to be using it and have a completely different interface, and not realize that everybody hates Windows and just use it because they have to, or whatever, for like work or something. And then Canonical was unsuccessful because they wanted the timing they wanted to do it. They didn't have any like supply lines and stuff. Like, they had to invent things and provide like a whole system. They had to figure out the doing manufacturing and all this other stuff. Now with the Librem and with potentially with this, they don't have to do all the manufacturing. They can outsource it into ODMs and stuff like that. So there's a potential where it actually is more likely to be doable, because the barrier to entry is a lot lower. The fact that a lot of apps the
people are bored to death of Android and iOS.
They're
boring now. It is so obscenely boring to play with an Android phone, and the same thing with an iOS phone.
There was actually
the same junk we've been looking at for the last 4 years. There's no major enhancements outside of the hardware. They're like, oh, the new iOS is out, or the new Android's out, and you look at it like, oh wow, they recolored the icons.
Yeah, I was listening to a tech podcast that was covering the Apple keynote, and one of them was saying, like, why do we care anymore? It's just the same phone with like a slightly different like design, with a slightly more powerful hardware, which is not even as powerful as the Android phones. And
take away a headphone jack and add a notch and call it a day.
Like, they're like, why do we even care anymore? But my point is also, like, not only is that hardware point you say, where they're so much more powerful, there's also a vastly impactful switch to doing web apps. You can still do mobile versions of web app form, so that instead of having to make like an Android app and an iPhone app, they're just doing web, and they could still have like a wrapper that works inside of the particular the OS and stuff.
You know, the more I think about that, that probably has a larger play in it than the computing power itself. And here's why: because just because you have a powerful computer doesn't necessarily mean that a site designed or an application designed for a desktop is going to work well in a mobile. I mean, imagine cramming LibreOffice Writer into a 5-inch screen, right? It would be pathetic. You have to, you have to have buttons and everything. The layout UI has to be designed for a mobile. So the mobile site though allows you to do that because you're coding for that anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing that I find a little bit frustrating is where people say, oh, but things haven't changed. It still looks the same as it did, like 5 years ago or whatever. What do you expect them to do? There was a podcast, there was a stream the other day where we were talking about Elementary, and somebody said, well, Elementary a couple of years ago was really, really great. It was innovative. It was new. Juno come out, and it's the same. And I was like, well, what else do you expect them to do with a desktop? Do you want them to be able to, and the analogy I used was, up pops an error message, so you headbutt it back into place because it's a 3D screen. It's like, what do you want them to do with the phone?
Headbutt it back in place.
Yeah, you start doing the punch out where you just kind of like...
When they're charging almost $1,000 for a phone now, I want it to be able to be as powerful as a computer, $1,000 laptop. I want it to, and the only one who's doing anything even close to that is Samsung with DeX. Not that they're the first one, because it was tried before by Motorola, but Samsung DeX is probably the closest opportunity where they're taking the ability to plug that phone then into a monitor or a docking station with a keyboard and mouse. And now that $1,000, right, that $1,000 interface now becomes a full computing interface, because at this kind of money, and with the little excitement that's going on in the phone OS itself, I expect you to start giving me the capabilities that I would get on a full, laptop solution.
Yeah. It's kind of like basically the idea of the convergence from Canonical is coming to fruition thanks to the DeX from Samsung. Right. Because that's essentially does exactly what they wanted to do.
And it does work exceptionally well, because I used to have one until my daughter nicked my Samsung phone. But hey, that's another story. That's it for you. So back on the Canonical vein of things, they've released some more Ubuntu statistics. And I always find these really interesting, because you start to read about certain things and then you think, well, is that because it's based upon this? And what would happen if that was changed? Would it change the metrics that they're talking about? But what I was pleased about was that a larger majority of users now opted to give them the information that they're asking for. So all this hoo-ha of, Canonical are spying on you, they want your information. It wasn't for that at all. It's just so that they can understand the type of machinery that's out there. So there's now 66% of the people who have done a recent install allowed them to collect the data, which was great. And also interesting to find out 80% of the installs were clean installs and only 20% were upgrades. Now, one of the things that I hear a lot around the community is, oh, this distro can't upgrade, that distro can't upgrade. Why do I have to upgrade every time there's a new release? Hey, 80% of you are doing it anyway, so what are you moaning about? It's just, it's really, really strange how they all talk about, oh, it must be upgradable, but then you never do it anyway. And some other stats that I also found interesting is that only 31% of the users have greater than 5 gigabyte. They have 5 to 8 gigabyte. Now, I would have thought that would have been more given the sort of plethora of machines that are out there now that sort of have 8 to 16 gig. I thought 31% was quite low.
Well, it could also be like there's a lot of people who have either multiple computers that they've had for a while and just don't get rid of, or they're like the types where they just, if they have a machine, they'll just keep it as long as until it dies or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Linux folks are very resourceful, so they're going to keep those machines running, and they're probably like most of us have multiple machines. Some of them are older, some of them are newer. You've got kind of a plethora of different options in there. Now, the one thing that shocked me was 29% of users selecting auto login. Like, You're on Linux. You're supposed to be security minded. Why do you have auto login on everything? 29%.
Okay,
I have it.
75% in this podcast.
Because
no.
you know, for somebody to get access to my machine because it's on auto login, they've got to get past me. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do it on my laptop when I take it
my
places.
gosh. What if you're not home, Zeb? They walk in, they take all of our Destination Linux top secrets and walk out the house with them.
Well,
When I'm
you
not
publish
here, there's
those
a
every week on the podcast, so there's that.
Well,
But
darn.
I'll give you a perfect example. So we have a bunch of Linux kiosks machine. Why would I want a password on any of those? So all of those are set to auto login, as well as all the machines around here are set to log in, because our security comes from inside of our web app. We authenticate. We have central directory is all handled inside of a web browser. Getting access to the physical machine, knock yourself out. I don't care. All you can really get to is Firefox or Chrome.
This is why at Southeast Linux Fest, everybody was changing your wallpaper every
Well-
time you walked away.
It was worse than that. Not just the wallpaper. People they were streaming horrible things, and they were trying to install Mac OS on my laptop. Turned into a real show, let me tell you.
So now tell me about that auto login policy.
Maybe
Right,
when
yeah.
you're
So
in a
what I was
conference.
saying- I think what I was trying to say was that everybody should not use auto login. You should set a strong 8 to 12 character password that contains both upper characters, lower characters, numbers, and special characters.
Yeah, there you go. That's the proper Linux way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's fine as long as you know, if you're on a laptop or you're going somewhere, especially a conference, maybe you have login set up. But if you're like just at your house or something, or you're like in your office, it's not a big deal if you have.
I trust
auto
no
login.
one.
That's fair. You could also have like what I do and just live inside of a vault.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, exactly.
So speaking of trusting no one, I don't know who trusted me to cover gaming news, but Dave,
Got a laugh out of this.
is it Damon 9? Is that how you pronounce it?
You got
has
it,
Linux
man.
support. And while I'm thrilled that there is a game out there that has additional Linux support, I, as we all know, am not much of a gamer. So I'm going to let a resident expert explain why this amazing interactive thriller blurs the lines between a movie and a game.
Well, listen, we're going to get you there. No, we're going to get you playing either a Gummy's Life or Stickman.
Listen, I'm opening
Bach.
Steam right now. What do I install?
Yeah,
I'll buy a game.
Bach. I think we're going to play Bach tonight. We should play Bach with Noah.
Yeah,
I'm going to install it right now.
it's a first-person
Ballistic
shooter.
Overkill.
Ballistic
Yeah.
overkill.
Yeah, ballistic
Yeah,
overkill.
we're all terrible at it, so that's the game to play. But this one is really interesting because these games were really popular back in the day. I'm thinking about my IBM Blue Lightning 75 megahertz with turbo boost computer back in the day when we would run games where they kind of tried to take a little bit of a movie and a little bit of a game and mix it together. And these were very popular in those days. I remember them coming out quite a bit. Now, this is kind of coming back now with a little bit more modern graphics, a little bit more of a gaming element to it, but they're blurring these lines between this and a horror type game. So to kind of scare you, getting you real video of these people who are maybe getting captured, or that you need to go find and save as you're getting clues and you're watching clips of videos of them and what they were up to before. So this is perfect for Halloween at the end of the day. It's a perfect game out there to get into that Halloween spirit. And I enjoy these type of games because they kind of give me that nostalgia feel from back in the day.
Yep, I like the movie concept. Like, there's a lot of movies, a lot of games back in the day for like in the mid '90s that did this a lot, and I like those. But I'm not really a fan of the horror movies, like the horror games and stuff like that.
Because you scare easily and you cry when you get scared.
No,
Well, I do that too.
That's
Are we judging people for that?
well.
I'm sorry.
Well,
Michael,
I mean,
how dare you?
exactly. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I don't like the horror movies because most of the time, like if it's like a psychological horror, that's interesting. But if it's more like just random gore and jump scares, I don't care. So.
Okay, well, if you're not excited about that, then how about you command your own elven army and defend mystical lands from sea serpents? Would that get your attention, Michael?
Is it pixelated?
Yeah.
Then yes.
Okay, perfect. So I've got the greatest game for you then, Kingdom Rush Origins, which is also out for Linux with 414 very positive reviews. 414 people can't be wrong. Now, tower defense games are super popular. I've played them usually only on my phone. Like those are the type of mobile games I'll download, tower defense and that type of thing. I don't play them on desktop very often, but this one, if you're interested in those style of games, You got tower upgrades, epic boss battles, hordes of enemies to defend against, new spells, 70 achievements to earn. It looks like a pretty cool game. Zeb, I purposely did not give you a pixelated game because I wanted to give you time to actually go look into the game and see if you would buy it and play it and do the proper research. What do you think, Zeb? What's the matter, Zeb?
I would have thought that being as we've got an intelligent guest presenter in our midst, that we would have risen above these. I'm just so glad Ryan was able. And what gets me, they got the cheek to charge £12 for this game. I mean, really?
It's a steal. It's less than a movie ticket.
Seriously, I was so pleased that you, Ryan, was able to extol its virtues, because I was just going to simply excavate it.
What is it with you with these words?
Well,
Don't you know he's from the South? He use slow words and talk slow.
That's
Use
right.
small words and talk slower. He don't understand all the big ones.
Would translate it to shoot it with a shotgun?
No, excavate it means I would have flayed it alive.
Ah, gotcha. Well, that one I understood. It's not that bad. This is a good game. Listen, these are fun games to go out there and play. And if you're in a tower defense, go check it out. And the most important thing, native Linux release right there. So they're supporting our fans.
I mean, I appreciate them supporting Linux, and regardless of the style of the game, like even the horror game that's supporting Linux, I appreciate that immensely. Like, and I'll happily talk about it, even pixelated games. And but it's just, whether I like them or not doesn't matter. I still appreciate they're supporting the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're never going to get me to play them.
How cool is it going to be to play Ballistic Overkill with Noah? Can I get an amen?
Amen.
So what do we got in the software spotlight here, Michael?
Well, we got an interesting application called Simple Note, and Simple Note is a note-taking app. It's kind of like Evernote, but it's a free Linux-based. Specifically, Evernote does not work on Linux, so therefore don't use it. So Simple Note is a really nice way to do note taking, so you can use it on your whatever distro you want to use, but also you can use it on your phones with Android and Mac and iOS support and stuff like that. I don't really use it that much, but I do use another product that they make called WordPress. So it's it's by the same people. So it's probably pretty good, and I've been told that Ryan and Zeb, both of you use Simple Note. I
mean, Simple Note was one of those first programs I found on Linux when I was going. At this point, I think I was planning to go back to Windows when I was doing the challenge, because I didn't realize I was going to fall in love with Linux. But one of the things I needed to replace was a note-taking app. I do this for anything that I'm working on. I usually will have a little app like Evernote up, and we'll be taking notes on something I'm working on, programming, learning, whatever I'm doing. And I want something that's very quick and is on multiple devices. Simple Note was one of the programs that came up that I fell in love with. I've used it all the way up until recently when I got my own Nextcloud server, and now I use QO Notes because it's just cool to have your own server and say so. But Simple Note keeps it nice and safe and secure, and it's free and it's easy. And it's worked for the last 2.5 years reliably and perfect for me. So if you were looking for a simple note-taking app, I think it's one of the best one out there. Now, you said Evernote doesn't make for Linux. I think there's some apps where people, of course, Linux will find a way, like, I don't know, Cheese Grater or whatever it calls, that runs some API of Evernote. But Simple Note supports it right out of the box, and it's worked in every distro. And again, on any phone, Android, Mac, iOS, whatever you've got, they've got a app for it. So it's a pretty cool option.
Two things would make. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go on, please do.
There are two things would make Simple Note the best note-taking app ever. One is a directory structure. So allow me to organize notes into categories, because what I quickly found is that Simple Note doesn't scale. You start, if you have 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 notes, it's fine. When you start using it for months on end and you start getting 500 notes for even one specific project, and you're like, okay, now how do I find anything? And the second thing is allow me the ability to paste a image into the notes, because right now that functionality doesn't exist.
It's true. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the only way you could do that is to create your category as a larger note and then paste all the notes that relate to that particular subject. But then again, that becomes messy. A category, a directory structure would be so much better. But from somebody who didn't use Notes, and then whenever I'd come across, I'd reinstall the distro after 6 months and say, right, what did I remember from last time? I'd have to go through Google again. And I'd never find that perfect note on Google that told me how to fix this. Now I'm using Simple Note. I mean, I don't make notes, but I think I've got about 87 entries now. And that's probably minuscule compared with you guys, but it is that simple and that quick to do. And as Ryan said, it will work across all distros. And it will work on your phone as well. So I'm loving it. It's a great little tool.
Yeah, and also as a bonus tip, there's a one called Turtle, which is a self-hosted alternative to Evernote. But it's not as easy to set up and easy and simple to use. So Simple Note is great for people who just want to get in and get it done. Turtle is for people who want to have like a more like tailored approach and like very specific.
You want to be frustrated when you write notes.
That is not what I said. So
he said you wanted to make a note about being frustrated.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's closer.
And what's our tip and trick of the week, Zeb?
Well, it's another one of these ones that I've always taken for granted, but I found out recently that a couple of people didn't know about certain aspects of it. And when you're in a web browser, I think most people probably know that if you Control+, then the generic page will get bigger. And if you Control-, you can make it smaller again. But what I didn't realize is that after you've done your Control+ 16 times because you wanted to see that particular, I'm not going to do Control- 16 times to get it back to where I was because I can't remember.
Which is what I used to do.
You actually just do a Control-0. Mm-hmm. And you go back to your default browser setting. Now, if you'd set your default within the browser at 125%, it will go back to 125%. If you've just left it at naturally 100%, then it will go back to your 100%. So no more pluses and minuses, Ryan. Just do a Control+0.
I knew that, Zeb. I don't know why you're telling me specifically. Of course I knew that. I'm a computer expert, Zeb.
To dovetail onto that, Control and Scroll works as well to make something bigger or smaller. And so what I find is, you were talking about pressing 16 times. I find that to be obnoxious no matter which direction I'm going. So Control and that's about the right size.
Yep.
I find myself doing that all the time.
I use the mouse scroll more than the shortcut commands or the key bindings. But there's like still Control-0 will still work. And I think this is actually interesting because I'm not sure if you planned it, but this beautifully ties into the email from the beginning of the show. And
that's right.
Yeah. And also, it also ties into a Plasma plug because Plasma has an ability to do super plus, minus, and 0 to zoom into the desktop so you can do it at any point.
Yeah, in i3 we have super duper.
Super in the sense of that other key.
Is that super shift?
How do you get back to? How do you get back out? Because it zoomed in.
It should be super 0 the same way.
Nope. Negatory.
Oh, this is if it's not set up by default. Some distros don't do it by default, but if it doesn't by default, you just hit super and then minus and just hold it down until it goes back to normal. Okay. So then it'll stop at that.
This is so cool. Do you know how much I'm going to use the heck out of this? Do you know how cool I can make tutorials? Look at this. Here, we're going to click on this icon. Whoop! Look at that.
I sometimes use it in demonstrations, but it's a really nice feature as well.
Cool. So, and that's actually quite a cool thing to end the show on. So we've reached the end of another show, and I'd like to say thank you very much to Noah again for coming along and giving us his expertise and insights into the items. And Ryan will go for the traditional patron.
There you go. Well, a big thank you to each and every one of you for continuing to support this show, watching, listening, however you do it. Noah, we got you for 2 weeks straight, man. That's talking about giving our patrons some love here and giving them something special. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we want to say we love our patrons. So thank you guys for all of your support. Thanks for joining us live, keeping us entertained, and you get to hang out with us after the show. And I'm sorry for that, but so Zeb, how can they get a hold of us?
Well, we now come back to the Zeb part of the show, and you've had 2 weeks off. Okay, so I'm sure I'm sure the other guys were all very nice and polite when asking you to send in the emails. Yeah. So you will send in the emails.
You will.
Otherwise, Zeb's going to come and get you.
Love it.
We want to know what you think about the show. We want you to let us know how you use Linux. Give us your comments, good or bad. We can take the criticisms. We've talked about them before, and we'll take them on the chin, and then we'll just move on. So send your comments through to comments@destinationlinux.org. You can add them to the bottom of the YouTube videos. You can add them, if you're a patron, onto the Patron page. And then you can go across to the section on our website that's the contact. And there you'll find all the information about Google+, Twitter, Mastodon, and the 16 other million things that Michael has told us about and provided us links to.
Yep. Well, we're going to be on Plurk next.
So
that's a thing, really.
The positive comments go to comments@destinationlinux.org. The negative ones, they go to Michael@destinationlinux.org.
Exactly. We don't want to hear it.
No.
Let him deal with it. And Michael, what do people need to do?
They need to keep liking that smash button.
Indeed.
And also, of course, share the show on your social media things as well, and rate in the podcast you use. So rate and review. It would help us and help grow the show and things like that. But anyway, it's a great thing to be able to go to the destinationlinux.org/contact and see all of the great opportunities to follow the podcast with Mastodon and Discord and Diaspora, everything. If you've heard of it, it's probably there, and if you haven't heard of it, it's probably there too.
Very good.
Excellent. So here we go then, everybody. The final parts of the show. So Ryan, can you just remind people again the benefits if they become a patron, what they can get, and how cheap it is?
It's darn near free. It's only $1, and you can come hang out with us live, which you get to see all of our mistakes. So become a patron. There you go.
Sounds good. So everybody have a great week, and remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.